Hi, everybody. It's Noah Fleischman back here on the Wolfpacker show. Today, we're previewing the NC State Georgia Super Regional that's set for Saturday afternoon in Athens, Georgia. We're joined here by Dogs HQ's Palmer Toms, part of the On3 network. And, Palmer, thanks for joining to talk about some Georgia baseball.
Yeah, Noah. I mean, we were just talking off air for a little bit. First of all, it's fun that we've got a little bit of an on-3 crossover here to preview a super regional. I mean, you've got a lot of sites that have some pretty good baseball programs, but I think both of us are considering ourselves fortunate that we've got in that group of 16 teams a matchup of 2 on 3 sites. So I mean, should be a really fun weekend. I know that NC State kind of cruised through Raleigh Regional, and Georgia cruised to an extent, a little bit more dramatic of a Sunday night finish in Athens than it was in Raleigh, but sets up for a really, really fun weekend, what I think will be at Foley Field.
Yeah, it will be a fun weekend, super regional. Both teams have been in this situation before. Back in 2008, this was the same super regional setup. Georgia, that was the last time they were in this moment and ended up being the runner-up. So we'll see what happens. But going back to this past weekend real quick, just run us through kind of Georgia's path to this point. I know that they beat Georgia Tech in extra innings, a team that actually swept NC State in ACC play this year. So, what was this weekend like down in Athens?
Yeah, I mean, really great atmospheres at Foley. I think Georgia fans probably looked at this regional when it came out and considered themselves like it was probably a pretty good draw, with UNC Wilmington being the 2. Maybe not the strongest of 2 seeds, not a power conference team, a good team, but not, a traditional power that you might have expected, to avoid a Wake Forest or a Duke, those 2 teams coming out of the ACC. I think Georgia fans had those 2 circled as really big time potential opponents that Georgia was going to have to play. They get Wilmington, they get Georgia Tech, the local in-state rival, and then Army, who's a really good ball club, had made 6 straight regionals and, gave Georgia a fight on Friday. I think that, I wouldn't say Georgia was lucky to make it out of that game. Anytime you see those 1-4 matchups, the 1 is typically the winner. But I would say that they were fortunate. They didn't have the best of starts from Leighton Finley. They had a lot of hard hit balls that just weren't dropping, and they were trailing throughout that game, and get out of it with an 8-7 win there. Move on to Saturday night in that winners bracket matchup with UNC Wilmington, and really just the offense clicked. Colby Branch hit a grand slam early in that game, and it was a done deal. Roll on to an 11-2 win over Wilmington. And then it was, Sunday night. And I think you guys know this, with NC State being in that situation where being in that Sunday night region final, playing a team that had won a game earlier that day, it can be difficult, but it feels good to have a mulligan in your back pocket there. So I was never really concerned about Georgia's chances of getting out of the regional. Tech's pitching depth was not their MO. So I felt pretty good about Georgia's chances if it went to a Monday. But we ended up going late into Sunday night instead, as UGA claws back from a deficit. They were down 5-2, down 5-3 through 7, and it hit a home run to lead off the 8th inning. Trey Phelps, true freshman for Georgia, has been a really big spark and provided a really big one on Sunday. And then Colby Branch, who I mentioned hitting the grand slam against Wilmington. He was my vote for most outstanding player of the regional. He did not get it, but he hit the game-tying home run there in the 9th. A little bit of drama in the bottom of the 9th. Georgia needs to execute a PFP there, and I wouldn't say it was the prettiest of PFPs. That's not how you draw it up in February when you're working on those drills. But as Corey Collins, who did win most outstanding player, Georgia first baseman that fielded the chopper to him and threw it over to first, said Chandler Marsh got his big ol' ass over there. So 6'5" Chandler Marsh falls on the bag. Replay upholds it. Georgia gets out of that 9th inning. We had to extras. Dogs put 3 on the board, take advantage of an error that Tech had throwing over the first baseman. Collins came through with a clutch 2-out bases clearing double that made it 8-5. And, they did the rest of it in the bottom of the 10th, got the 3 outs. Again, I feel like Georgia fans didn't really breathe until that game was over, because it was a rival, because you had Drew Burress that was constantly coming up to the plate with runners on, and had a bases loaded situation there in the bottom of the 10th, where it felt like every time that kid was getting a hit, it was or getting a bat on the ball, it was going far. And so Georgia fans very relieved to get out of that situation against a rival. And it's, was an awesome atmosphere at Foley Field.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, both teams now come into this, 3-0 in an NCAA tournament play. I mean, I think they feel good about where they're at. But, you look at Georgia, I think he obviously sticks on the page is Charlie Condon and what he's done, probably the best player in college baseball right now. What does he have brought to this team? And, what have you kind of seen from him throughout the year?
Yeah, I think, going back to, so as we're recording this here on June 4th, Georgia hired Wes Johnson June 5th of last year, if I recall correctly. So we're still, we're 1 day shy of a year after that decision to bring in Wes, who was the pitching coach at LSU at the time. And, really the reason I go back to that is it was so big to keep Charlie around. Had an SEC freshman of the year season last year, redshirted his first year on campus, was a walk-on. I feel like everybody in college baseball knows that story by now. But he had an outstanding freshman season, and to keep him around through the change was so big. It gave Georgia a piece that they could build around. Wes talked, in his first press conference about, hey, we understand what Foley Field is. We understand it's not the biggest of parks out there. And we're going to build to that. We're going to take the power that, you need to have in a smaller setting. And we're going to find that power. So they went out and they had it already with Charlie Condon. They got it back with Corey Collins, who many expected would go 3 and out and get drafted, went undrafted. And so he was back in Athens. And then they added it with several additions from the transfer portal, 18 in total. Dylan Goldstein has been a big bat for them. Slade Alford has been a big bat from them. Colby Branch, who I've mentioned a couple times, he's a transfer too. The entire outfield, I mean, all over the field, Georgia has looked different this year. And I think, for me, that was the biggest question coming into this season was how would they gel? How are they going to find a lineup? Condon has been a big part of that. He's been the centerpiece of that the entire year. And he's provided, somebody that people can look to when things haven't been pretty, when the pitching hasn't been perfect, when, maybe their back was against the wall and, they got swept in their first series of SEC play by Kentucky. Things haven't always been pretty. And I think a lot of Georgia fans and probably some of these players too that had been around, were maybe thinking back on, seasons prior that hadn't gone the way that folks had hoped in Athens. And I think Condon and his presence and his bat, his play, his performance, all of the above provided just something that they could look to and say, hey, we're going to be okay. We've got the best player in college baseball. And anytime that he's taking the field, we're going to have a chance. So that has been so big. And he has been a foundation piece for the first year of the Wes Johnson era.
You talk about him and feeling good about it, but you're right. It's year one of having a coaching staff, on campus. Was this the expectation, hosting a super regional in year one?
I don't think so. I mean, you'd be crazy to say the expectation at Georgia is to host a super regional because they haven't gotten to a super regional since 2008. Kids that were born that year are driving now, which is just absolutely crazy to think about. So there are people on the roads these days that had not seen Georgia in a super regional. And when you put it like that, to say that the expectation to get here would have been crazy. I think, with so much uncertainty, I mean, Georgia was picked 6th out of 7 teams in the SEC East. They very much outperformed that and finished above that. They finished 6th in the SEC, in a very strong conference. And so I would say the expectations were probably to be better, to be competitive, to maybe be one of those teams that was on the bubble. You saw so many 13 and 17 SEC teams get into the NCAA tournament this year. I don't think anybody would have been shocked if Georgia was in that situation. Now, they weren't in that situation. They were 17 and 13 instead. And, they put themselves in a great situation to host and to potentially be a national seed. And, things didn't go the way that they wanted at the SEC tournament, but their play down the stretch, sweeping a series against Vanderbilt, going on the road and sweeping South Carolina, taking one from Florida, and you go back to earlier in the season and the fact that they took one from Clemson, in a midweek matchup, took one from Tennessee on the road, took one from Texas A&M on the road, took one from Mississippi State on the road. Maybe you're not winning those series, but you're not getting swept either. And so all that being said, the expectation was for Georgia to be competitive. I don't think that anybody expected Georgia to be hosting a regional, to be winning a regional, to be hosting a super regional. And I think that, anything at this point, beyond this, whether they win this weekend or lose this weekend, it's all just icing on the cake for Georgia fans.
For sure. And, the expectations that Georgia's going to hit. But when you look at the pitching staff, I think it's similar to NC State. We talked about it beforehand. Started off not great and, got better as the season went on. What should people expect when they see these Georgia pitchers take them out?
Yeah. So Wes Johnson, obviously a pitching guru, somebody that has, that is his calling card. And so, led LSU to a national championship last year with a phenomenal pitching staff. There is not a Paul Skeens on this pitching staff. Let's just preface it with that. And that obviously made a huge difference for LSU last year. But I think that there was always a lot of confidence that he was going to improve the pitching. He went out and recruited the hitters, and he got a really good assistant coach in Will Coggins from Kentucky, who had been their hitting coach up there. Brought in a guy to, some guys to help with that, both from the portal and as coaches to his staff. But, there wasn't a ton of, they didn't go out and get an ace pitcher. They didn't go out and get, Burns, or they didn't get a Skeens. There was nobody that they went out and got that has really been a plug and play. You felt good about him from day one. It has been a gradual improvement. Leighton Finley is somebody that was around the program last year, was a freshman last year, is a sophomore. He has improved. He has been Georgia's, constant piece in Georgia's rotation this season. Charlie Goldstein was somebody that he's been in and out of the rotation. Probably would not expect to see him this weekend. Ended up getting hurt against Georgia Tech there. And he's battled some arm injuries this season, but somebody that came back and provided a really good veteran presence up front in the rotation. Zach Harris is somebody that's gotten better. He was a transfer, but he wasn't seeing a ton of innings early on. Came over from Georgia Southern and has slowly but surely gotten better. Had a career high outing on Sunday with 6 innings against Georgia Tech, 109 pitches. Believe it was 7 strikeouts, but don't quote me on that one. And I think that is the theme of this staff. Chandler Marsh is somebody that has gotten better and provided some really good innings out of the bullpen. Brian Zeldin is somebody that has been good, had pitched in the NCAA tournament. He was at Penn last year, comes over to Georgia, and he has improved. Josh Roberge. You look up and down this Georgia rotation. Christian Maracna, another guy that they brought in from the transfer portal. He was a George Mason transfer. Georgia feels a lot better about its pitching today than they did a month ago, than they did 2 months ago. And I think that is a testament to what Wes Johnson has been able to do. Always, he hasn't said it, but I feel really strongly that he would believe this, that he always felt confident in his ability to develop pitchers and get this staff in order to a point where, hey, you've got an offense that's so explosive. Just give them a chance. Georgia has more than given these offensive bats a chance down the stretch.
Yeah, when you look at that, how do you think they set this up for the weekend and pitching wise? Just approaching this 3-game series where you need 2 of them, but where are they going to come from pitching wise?
Yeah, I would say it's interesting that they've now got this extra day of rest. We both mentioned, Leighton Finley was Georgia's Friday starter last weekend. But he didn't have the best of outings, but then came back on Sunday and provided 3 outs in the 10th. So I would guess that he is going to be Georgia's Friday starter in this one. But you may, Saturday starter in this one. But you may see Georgia stay with Colton Smith on Saturday if he's available. He left Saturday's game against Wilmington, was struggling with a little bit of cramping. That's the same injury that Charlie Goldstein had and kept him out for a month. And so I would say he's questionable this weekend. There's a little bit of concern there because he has been one of, if not Georgia's best pitcher, down the stretch. But Leighton Finley, Colton Smith, Zach Harris, those are the three to watch for Georgia starting games. Brian Zeldin, Josh Roberge, Christian Maracna, Chandler Marsh. Those four right there, you can feel confident that you will see those guys coming out of the bullpen for Georgia. After that, it all really depends on how deep into their bag that they've got to go.
Yeah, Colton Smith seems to be an impact guy on the mound. 99 strikeouts this year, just 19 walks. Seems like he can really, fill up the zone. How big would it be for Georgia to have him healthy and pitching on Saturday night or Saturday afternoon? If he's able to go out there,
it would be huge. I mean, whether it's on Saturday or Sunday, and whether they keep Finley, on a week's rest, and push him from Sunday to Sunday, from pitching on this past Sunday to pitching this next Sunday, and keep Colton on that week rest as well. TBD. But whatever order those two would go in would be so big. And I think ultimately it's so big because you feel good about those two as weekend guys for Georgia, not just this year and not just right now, but going into next year. You want to see those guys eat up some innings because, again, you don't feel great about the back end of your bullpen if you're the Bulldogs. You don't want to have to put so much pressure on the offense and so much pressure on guys that maybe haven't had a ton of innings throughout the season. Obviously, I would be willing to bet we're going to see somebody thrown in there that is asked to play and pitch at a level that they have not pitched at this season. That's just postseason baseball for you. But I think it would be so big for Georgia to have those two guys, Leighton Finley and Colton Smith, and Zach Harris too. I mean, credit to him on Sunday for eating 6 innings after he gave up 4 in the second and had given up 5 in those 2 innings there. For him to settle in was so big for Georgia because they were able to save some of those arms for a potential Monday game. They were able to, not ask guys to extend their pitch counts further than they were comfortable. They were able to get him through 6 and then, finish out the final 4 that they played 10 with some regularity there. So it's so big for Georgia to have these starters, give them good starts, good quality starts, because you just don't feel super confident about the back end of your bullpen. You feel better, but probably not, Georgia's calling card.
For sure. Now we've talked about the hitters, we've talked about the pitching. If you got to pick one person or a group or position on the field, who's going to be an X factor if Georgia, wants to have a successful weekend at home this weekend?
Yeah, there's a couple that I would look at. Charlie Condon, obviously, he's an easy player to circle. I think it's important that he's patient and doesn't try to press too much. Teams are not going to pitch to him. We all know that. I wouldn't pitch to him. I wouldn't ask any team to pitch to him because if you give him a good pitch, odds are you're not seeing that ball. So, I felt like last weekend, he didn't have his best weekend. He hit a home run in his first at bat. Probably didn't get all of that one, but he sent it a long ways out of the park. But after that, I felt like there were times where maybe he was swinging at the best pitches, and he was maybe just swinging at those pitches just to swing and feel like he was going to get a ball in play and make something happen. If my advice to Charlie would be, and not that he needs it, but be patient at the plate, take your pitches, take your walks, whether it's intentional or, just you're not getting the best of pitches. I think it's important for him that he is, and for Georgia overall, that Charlie Condon is getting on base, whether that's by walk or by waiting and getting a good pitch. So, I would say him. Corey Collins has been big for them. Trey Phelps has been big. Those guys, hit before and after Condon. And so, for those guys to surround Condon, that top of the order, is very important. And then I would go back to the pitching. Those two guys that we were just talking about, Leighton Finley and Colton Smith, if he's healthy, it's really important that these Georgia starters give this bullpen, some quality innings on the front end so that they're not asking the bullpen to do too much on the back end.
For sure. And then, the last thing before we get out of here is what should NC State fans that make the trip down to Athens this weekend expect, from Foley Field and what the town has to offer?
Yeah, I mean it's a really really fun place. We were talking about it earlier. There's a house up in right field, the greenhouse, and a really fun atmosphere up there. I had some buddies that lived up there when they were in school, and so I've taken in a couple of games from up there, and so it's really fun. It's not the biggest stadium out there. It's not a Mississippi State or an LSU. That Georgia administration has kind of called it the Wrigley of the SEC, because it is kind of cornered and positioned in a neighborhood of sorts. So that creates an interesting feel to it. I think, in terms of the town, there's so much to do. And I think there's going to be a lot of time to do it with an early start on Saturday, an early start on Sunday. Maybe, folks get in town on Friday, and so many great places to eat in downtown, so many great places to go enjoy a beer and, really enjoy what looks like, knock on wood, weather looks pretty strong for this weekend. So lot to do in Athens, lot to enjoy. And I think that we're in for a really fun series between the Bulldogs and the Wolfpack.
Awesome. Well, Palmer, I appreciate you hopping on and joining the preview this weekend. I'm sure, you'll be out there. I'll be out there. We'll have a lot of coverage, on the On3 network of both sides of this. So if everyone wants to get, what NC State's thinking or what Georgia's thinking, just go on there and find it. But Palmer, I appreciate you hopping on.
Absolutely.